The metallic clang of the heavy door echoed through Silent Oak's shooting range as Sarah Mitchell stepped inside, her weathered hands clutching a small rifle case that had seen better days. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor, illuminating clusters of men in tactical gear who turned to stare at the newcomer. At 43, Sarah's appearance suggested nothing more threatening than a suburban housewife who'd taken a wrong turn: faded jeans, a simple blue flannel shirt, and graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Excuse me, ma'am." A young employee intercepted her path, his voice carrying the practiced patience reserved for lost civilians. "The shopping mall is 2 blocks down. This is a professional shooting facility." Sarah's green eyes, dulled by years of deliberate suppression, flickered with something unreadable. "I'm here for the open competition registration," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the distant gunfire from the ranges. The employee's eyebrows shot up, his gaze dropping to her battered case. "The Regional Tactical Championship, ma'am? That's for experienced marksmen. We have beginner classes on Wednesdays, if you're interested in learning basic firearm safety." Before Sarah could respond, a commanding voice cut through their exchange. "Is there a problem here, Martinez?" Derek Hawthorne strode toward them, his presence filling the space like smoke from a fire. At 6'3", with shoulders that strained against his custom shooting vest, he embodied everything the modern tactical shooter aspired to be. His AR-15, worth more than most people's cars, hung from a 3-point sling across his chest. As the range's lead instructor and 3-time state champion, his word carried the weight of law within these walls. "This lady wants to register for the championship," Martinez explained, unable to hide his skepticism. Derek's steel-gray eyes swept over Sarah with the dismissive efficiency of someone accustomed to categorizing threats and non-threats. She clearly fell into the latter category. "The entry fee is $500. He stated flatly, "Non-refundable. Competitors must demonstrate proficiency with tactical rifles. Not," he gestured vaguely at her case, "whatever grandpa's squirrel gun you've got there." Sarah set her case on the counter with deliberate care. "I have the entry fee," she said, producing a small envelope of carefully counted bills. "And I prefer to shoot what I know." Derek's laugh was sharp and condescending. "Look, sweetheart, this isn't a turkey shoot at the county fair. We're talking about engaging multiple targets at varying distances, under time pressure, with precision requirements that—" "I understand the parameters," Sarah interrupted softly. "I've read the rulebook." The interruption seemed to irritate Derek more than her presence. He leaned forward, using his height advantage to loom over her. "Have you now? Then you know that the minimum caliber requirement is 223. That little 22 of yours won't even qualify." Sarah's fingers found the worn spot on her wedding ring, a gesture so automatic she didn't realize she was doing it. Section 3. Subsection C of the competition rules states that any rimfire cartridge may be used in the precision division, provided the competitor accepts the scoring handicap for reduced target impact visibility. The silence that followed was broken only by the muffled reports from the active ranges. Derek's jaw tightened, his authority challenged by someone who'd actually done their homework. Several regular shooters had drifted closer, drawn by the unusual confrontation. "Fine," Derek said through clenched teeth. "Waste your money. But don't come crying when you're eliminated in the first round." He turned to Martinez. "Process her registration. Put her in the precision division with the other hobbyists." As Martinez reluctantly began entering her information, Derek addressed the growing audience. "Gentlemen, gather round. Seems we're going to have some entertainment tomorrow. Mrs." He glanced at the registration form. "Mitchell here thinks her little plinker can compete with real weapons." The laughter that rippled through the group had an ugly edge to it. Sarah remained still, her expression unchanged, As Derek continued his impromptu sermon on the superiority of modern tactical firearms over outdated relics. "Tell you what," Derek announced, warming to his theme. "I'll make this interesting. When she inevitably fails to qualify, I'll personally refund her entry fee. Can't have people saying Silent Oak takes advantage of confused housewives." More laughter. Someone muttered something about participation trophies and women thinking they can do everything these days. Sarah finished her registration in silence, picked up her case, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at Derek. "I'll see you tomorrow at 8, she said simply, looking forward to it. Derek called after her, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Wear something comfortable. You'll be going home early." As the door closed behind her, Derek turned to his admirers. $20 says she doesn't even show up tomorrow. 50 says if she does, she won't complete the first stage without crying. None of them noticed the small memorial plaque by the door. Worn smooth by years of touches from passing hands, it bore the names of range members who died in service to their country. Third from the bottom, almost invisible unless you knew to look, Staff Sergeant David Mitchell. 1975到2019. Distinguished Marksman. Sarah sat in her 10-year-old Honda Civic, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the effort of maintaining her facade. 5 years. 5 years since David's death in Afghanistan, since she'd buried both her husband and her identity as one of the Marine Corps' most decorated female snipers. The official report said IED, the truth, known only to her and a handful of classified documents, was far more complex. She opened the glove compartment and touched the edge of a faded photograph, her and David at Camp Pendleton, both in dress blues. The day they'd competed against each other for the first time. He'd beaten her by 2 points. It was the last time anyone had. Tomorrow wasn't about prize money or trophies. It was about something much deeper, something that had brought her to this specific range, to face this specific man. Derek Hawthorne didn't recognize her. Of course, why would he? The last time they'd met, she'd been Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Chen, David's spotter and wife, trying to file a complaint about faulty equipment that Derek's company, Hawthorne Tactical Solutions, had supplied to their unit. Equipment that had failed catastrophically in the field, equipment that Derek had known was defective but had shipped anyway to meet a lucrative contract deadline. The photograph blurred as tears finally came. David had bled out in her arms because his plate carrier had separated at the seams during a firefight, the ceramic plates falling away when he needed them most. The investigation had been buried, the company's lawyers ensuring that combat damage became the official cause. But Sarah had kept copies of everything: test reports, email chains, quality control documents that proved Derek Hawthorne had knowingly sent defective equipment to combat zones. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of justice that the system had denied her. The competition began at dawn, the morning air crisp with the promise of rain. Sarah arrived to find the range already busy, with competitors making final adjustments to their equipment. The atmosphere was thick with testosterone and gun oil, punctuated by the metallic sounds of weapons being checked and rechecked. She dressed deliberately, the same faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and beat-up sneakers that had seen better days. Around hair, men in thousands of dollars worth of tactical gear prepared their arsenals. Her single rifle case looked almost comic in comparison. Well, Derek's voice boomed across the preparation area. She actually showed up. Martinez. Get my wallet ready. Sarah found an empty bench at the far end of the staging area and began her preparations with methodical precision. From her case, she withdrew a Ruger 10-20 that looked like it had been purchased from a pawn shop. The wood stock was scratched and worn. The bluing on the barrel showed honest wear. Nothing about it suggested anything more than a farmer's varmint rifle. The other competitors barely glanced her way, focused on their own equipment. Most sported AR platform rifles with every conceivable attachment, bipods, laser sights, custom triggers, suppressors. The collective value of firearms present could have purchased a small house. The first stage was straightforward: 5 targets at 50 yards. 10 rounds. 60 seconds. A warm-up. Really. Designed to eliminate only the most incompetent. As competitors were called in random order, Sarah watched the others shoot. Most were competent weekend warriors. Their groups respectable, but showing the telltale horizontal stringing of shooters who jerked their triggers. Derek, shooting third, put on a clinic of tactical precision, his custom AR barking rapidly as he engaged each target with practiced efficiency. Mitchell. "Sarah!" the range officer called. She rose quietly, carrying her rifle with the muzzle pointed safely downward. The walk to the firing line felt both endless and instantaneous. She was aware of Derek positioning himself directly behind her station, arms crossed, ready to enjoy the show. "Shooter ready?" the row asked, his tone suggesting he expected her to say no. Sarah nodded, settling into a standing position that looked awkward to casual observers. Her feet were placed differently than the tactical stance the others used. Her support hand farther forward on the rifle than modern technique suggested. To Derek and his followers, she looked like someone who'd learned to shoot from a library book. Commence firing. The first shot from her, 22, was almost inaudible compared to the centerfire rifles that had preceded it. A tiny pop lost in the ambient noise of the range. Through the spotting scope, the RO frowned, then looked again. "Center X," he announced, surprise creeping into his voice. Sarah's second shot followed so quickly it seemed impossible she'd had time to reacquire her sight picture. Another pop. "Center X." By the 5th shot, a small crowd had gathered behind the RO, watching through binoculars and spotting scopes. Sarah's target showed a single ragged hole barely larger than a quarter. All 10 shots passing through nearly the same point. "Time," the row called. 10 rounds. 10 X's. Perfect score. Sarah saved her rifle and stepped back, her expression unchanged. The silence was deafening until Derek's voice cut through it. "Beginner's luck," he declared loudly. "Anyone can get lucky at 50 yards. Wait until we get to real distance." But there was something different in his tone now. A slight edge that hadn't been there before. As Sarah returned to her bench, she caught him staring at her with narrowed eyes, as if trying to place a half-remembered face. The second stage increased both difficulty and distance, multiple targets at 100 yards, engaging them in a specific sequence within a time limit. This was where equipment advantages typically showed themselves, where the flat shooting cartridges and optical sights of the tactical rifles would shine. Sarah watched as shooter after shooter tackled the course. Some did well. Others struggled with the target sequence under time pressure. Derek, when his turn came, was flawless, his expensive rifle and equally expensive training combining to produce a dominant performance. "That's how it's done," he announced to his assembled fan club. "Superior firepower. Superior training. Superior results. Some things can't be overcome with wishful thinking." When Sarah's name was called again, the crowd behind the firing line had grown. Word had spread about her first stage performance. Drawing curious observers from other parts of the range, she approached the line with the same quiet deliberation, checked her rifle, and waited for the command. This time, she made subtle adjustments to her stance that only a trained eye would notice. Her breathing pattern changed, becoming so shallow as to be almost imperceptible. When the timer started, she moved through the targets with a fluid economy of motion that wasted nothing. Pop, pop, pop. The tiny rifle spoke in a steady rhythm, each shot perfectly timed, each transition between targets smooth as water. Through the scopes, observers watched rounds punch through X-rings with monotonous precision. Time, perfect score. Again, a murmur ran through the crowd. 2 perfect stages in a row moved beyond luck into the realm of genuine skill. Derek pushed forward. His face flushed. "Let me see that rifle," he demanded. The RO stepped between them. "Sir, equipment inspections are only conducted if there's a formal challenge. Are you filing one?" Derek hesitated. Challenging another competitor's equipment without cause was considered poor sportsmanship, and with this many witnesses, it could damage his reputation. "No," he said finally. "Just curious about her." Setup. Sarah had already returned to her bench, cleaning her rifle with practiced movements. She didn't look up when Derek approached. Flanked by 2 of his regular shooting buddies, "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked. His tone conversational but his eyes hard. "My husband taught me," Sarah replied quietly, continuing her maintenance routine. "Is he here? I'd like to meet him." "He passed away." The words were spoken without emotion. A simple statement of fact. Derek's eyes flicked to her wedding ring. "Recent? 5 years?" Something shifted in Derek's expression. A flash of recognition quickly suppressed. 5 years. He'd sold a lot of equipment to the military 5 years ago. The contracts had made him rich, even if there had been some unfortunate incidents. "What did you say your maiden name was?" he asked casually. Sarah looked up then, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "I didn't." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken history. Behind Derek, one of his friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden tension. "Military wife?" Derek pressed, trying to sound casual. "Marine wife?" Sarah corrected, her voice carrying a weight that made Derek take an involuntary step back. An older man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap had been watching from nearby. He approached slowly, his eyes fixed on Sarah's hands as she worked on her rifle. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said respectfully. "That technique you're using to clean your rifle, that's old core method. Haven't seen that in years." Sarah glanced up, recognizing a kindred spirit. "Some habits are worth keeping," she said simply. The veteran nodded knowingly, then looked at Derek. "You might want to be careful, son. This lady's got the hands of someone who's put rounds down range when it counted." Derek's face darkened, but before he could respond, the announcement came for Stage 3 to begin. The afternoon brought the 3rd stage: unknown distance targets, wind calls, and shooting from various positions. This was where the competition separated serious marksmen from weekend plinkers. The wind had picked up, gusting unpredictably across the range, turning trajectory calculation into an art form. Sarah watched the wind indicators with an intensity that drew curious looks. While others relied on their expensive ballistic calculators and wind meters, she studied the grass, the mirage, the subtle movements of dust in the air. Her fingers occasionally moved in small patterns, as if working through calculations. Derek shot well but not perfectly, the wind pushing 2 of his shots into the 9-ring. His frustration was evident as he left the line, barking at anyone who came too close. Other shooters struggled more significantly, the challenging conditions exposing the limits of equipment and training. When Sarah took the line, she spent longer than usual preparing. Those watching closely noticed her making tiny adjustments to her sight, compensating for conditions in ways that seemed almost prescient. When she finally began shooting, it was with a rhythm that seemed to ignore the gusting wind entirely. Each shot was released in the brief lulls between gusts, timed with a precision that spoke of deep experience. Her hold-offs for wind were minimal, as if she could predict exactly when and how the air would move. Target after target fell to her systematic precision. "How is she doing that?" someone whispered. "It's like she knows what the wind will do before it happens." The Vietnam veteran from earlier watched with growing recognition. "I've seen that before," he said quietly. "In Afghanistan, Had a sniper could read wind like that. Never missed. Not once. They called her the Ghost. Time! The Rose call cut him off. Another perfect score for Mitchell. The crowd's murmur had grown to open discussion. 3 perfect stages with a .22 rifle that looked like it belonged in a garage sale. It wasn't supposed to be possible. Derek stalked over to the RO station. "I want her tested for performance enhancers," he announced loudly. "Nobody shoots like that without chemical help." The RO looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Hawthorne, that's a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence?" "The evidence is on the scoreboard. She's using a toy rifle and out shooting people with real equipment. It's not natural." "Since when is skill unnatural?" Sarah's voice was quiet but carried clearly. She had approached unnoticed, her rifle cased and slung over her shoulder. "Would you like to request a drug test? I'm happy to comply." Derek turned on her, his face red. "I don't know what your game is, lady." "But my game," Sarah interrupted, steel entering her voice for the first time, "is shooting. Nothing more. Nothing less. If you have a problem with my performance, file a formal complaint. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow for the final stage." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Hawthorne, you might want to work on your trigger control. You're jerking shots to the right under pressure. It's a common problem with shooters who rely too heavily on equipment to compensate for poor fundamentals." The silence that followed her exit was deafening. Derek stood frozen, his mouth open but no words coming out. Someone in the crowd snickered, quickly suppressed. "She's right about your trigger control," the Vietnam veteran observed mildly. "Saw it myself. Maybe you should spend less time buying gear and more time practicing basics." Derek's hands clenched into fists, but he maintained enough control not to respond. Instead, he stormed off toward the parking lot, pulling out his phone as he walked. He had calls to make, favors to call in. Nobody embarrassed Derek Hawthorne and walked away clean. That evening, Derek made phone calls. His connections ran deep in both the shooting community and the defense industry. By midnight, he had a name: Sarah Chen. Later, Sarah Mitchell after marriage. Marine Corps Sniper School honor graduate. Multiple déploiements. Classified operations. And most interesting, her husband had died in an equipment failure involving gear purchased from Hawthorne Tactical Solutions. He set down his phone, mind racing. The batch of plate carriers and tactical vests he'd rushed through production 5 years ago had contained a known defect, stitching that could fail under extreme stress. He'd shipped them anyway, buried the test reports, counted on the chaos of war to obscure any failures. The DoD contract had been worth millions. Now the widow of one of those failures was here, shooting against him, humiliating him in front of his peers. It couldn't be coincidence. Derek poured himself a whiskey, his hands shaking slightly. The quality control manager had warned him. The testing lab had documented the failures, but the deadline had been tight. The penalty clauses severe. He'd made a calculated decision. Ship the defective units mixed in with good ones. The odds of catastrophic failure in actual combat conditions were only about 3% acceptable losses, he'd told himself. He opened his laptop and accessed his archived files, encrypted and hidden behind multiple security layers. The reports were all there, damning in their clinical detail. Lot numbers, failure rates, projected casualty estimates. He'd kept them as insurance, never imagining they'd become evidence against him. A knock at his home office door made him jump. His wife peered in, concern on her face. "Everything okay? You've been in here for hours?" "Fine," he said quickly, closing the laptop. "Just preparing for tomorrow's competition?" She frowned. "Since when do you need to prepare? You always win these things. There's a new shooter. She's complicated." His wife studied him. In 20 years of marriage, she'd learned to read his moods. "Derek, "What have you done?" "Nothing." He lied. "Go to bed. I'll be up soon." After she left, Derek returned to his research. Sarah Mitchell's service record was largely classified, but what he could access was impressive. Multiple commendations, expert ratings in every weapon system, operational success rate that bordered on mythical process. And then, 5 years ago, she disappeared from the military entirely. Right after her husband's death, Derek's secure phone buzzed. A text from his former DoD liaison: "Heard Sarah Chen's name tonight? If she's surfaced, you have problems." That investigation was never officially closed, just buried. "Watch yourself." He deleted the message immediately, his mind spinning. If Sarah had evidence, if she'd kept copies of documents, but no, if she had proof, she would have used it years ago. This had to be something else. Personal revenge. Maybe psychological warfare. Come to his territory. Humiliate him publicly. Destroy his reputation in the shooting community. Derek smiled grimly. Two could play that game. He had resources she couldn't imagine. By tomorrow, he'd have countermeasures in place. She might be a legendary sniper, but this was his range. His competition, his rules. He made another call. This one to the range's maintenance chief. "I need you to do something for me tonight. Off the books, there's an extra 5,000 in it for you." As he explained what he wanted, Derek felt his confidence returning. Sarah Mitchell might have been the ghost, but ghosts could be exorcised. Tomorrow, she'd learn that the real world operated differently than the battlefield. He had no idea that Sarah had anticipated his every move, that she'd counted on his arrogance and fear driving him to make exactly these mistakes. The trap was set, and Derek Hawthorne was walking into it with his eyes wide open. The final day dawned gray and drizzling. Perfect conditions for the championship's most challenging stage. The format was simple in concept, brutal in execution. 10 targets at distances from 50 to 500 yards. Unknown sequence. Limited ammunition. Scored on both accuracy and time. The range was packed. Word had spread through the shooting community about the mysterious woman with the .22, who was perfect through 3 stages. Social media buzzed with speculation and debate. Some called it fake news. Others posted grainy photos of her targets, the ragged one-hole groups that seemed impossible. Sarah arrived to find herself the center of attention. Photographers snapped pictures as she unpacked her rifle. Other competitors gave her a wide berth, unsure whether to be impressed or resentful. She ignored them all, focusing on her preparation ritual. But something was different. Her rifle's weight felt off by mere grams. Someone had been in the equipment room overnight. Sarah smiled inwardly. Derek was predictable. A quick inspection revealed what he'd done. The scope mounts had been subtly loosened, just enough to shift under recoil. The windage adjustment had been turned 2 clicks right. Amateur work? Really? She fixed the sabotage methodically, making sure several people noticed her checking and adjusting her equipment. Let them wonder. Let Derek sweat, wondering if his tampering had been discovered. "Ladies and gentlemen," the match director announced over the PA system, "welcome to the final stage of the Regional Tactical Championship. Today's conditions will test every aspect of marksmanship skill. Wind is variable from the south-southwest at 5 to 15 miles per hour, with gusts to 20. Light rain may affect visibility. Shooters will engage targets in the order revealed by the electronic system. Good luck to all competitors." The random draw put Derek in the first group of shooters. He took the line with visible determination, his expensive rifle gleaming despite the overcast conditions. When the timer started, he attacked the course with aggressive precision. His performance was impressive. Years of training and natural talent showed as he moved through the targets efficiently, but the conditions were challenging even for him. The wind pushed several shots to the edges of the scoring rings, and the rain on his expensive optic forced him to pause twice to wipe the lens. Final time, 4 minutes, 23 seconds. Score, 94 out of 100. It was good enough to take the lead, and Derek's supporters erupted in cheers. He left the line with a satisfied smirk, making sure to walk past Sarah's preparation area. "Beat that with your antique?" he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Sarah looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "Every piece of equipment can fail," she said quietly. "My husband learned that the hard way. The question is whether the failure is from wear and age, or from negligence and greed." Derek's face went pale. He knew she knew. But here, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, what could either of them do? Other shooters followed, none matching Derek's score. The conditions were simply too challenging, the course too demanding. By the time Sarah's name was called, Derek's score still led by a comfortable margin. She approached the line carrying her rifle without a sling, cradled in her arms like she was walking to a deer stand. The crowd pressed closer, phones raised to record what would either be triumph or disaster. The Vietnam veteran from yesterday stood near the front. "Give 'em hell, Marine," he said softly. Sarah nodded once, then settled into her stance. Through the light rain, she became absolutely still, a statue carved from purpose and memory. "Shooter ready?" the row asked. "Ready?" Sarah confirmed, her voice carrying the weight of 5 years of preparation for this moment. "Commence firing." The first target illuminated at 200 yards. Sarah's rifle spoke instantly. The quiet pop almost lost in the rain. "Hit. Center X," the electronic system announced. The second target appeared at 350 yards. A challenging shot for any rifle. Nearly impossible for a .22 in these conditions. Sarah didn't hesitate. She held high and right, compensating for both distance and wind, with a calculation that happened faster than conscious thought. Pop. Hit. Center X. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even Derek's supporters watched in stunned disbelief as Sarah worked through the course. Her movements were minimal, efficient, almost meditative. Between shots, she barely seemed to breathe, becoming as still as the rifle she held. 2 yards. The target seemed impossibly small through the rain. Sarah waited, reading the wind patterns in the grass, the rain's angle, the subtle shifts in air pressure. When she fired, it was between heartbeats, in the space where everything aligned. Hit. X-ring. Derek stood rigid, his hands clenched so tight, his knuckles were white. This wasn't just good shooting. This was the kind of performance that redefined what was possible, and she was doing it with a RCR in the rain, making it look effortless. 2 yards. At this distance, the little .22 bullet would drop over 4 feet from the bore line. The wind would push it several feet off course. Sarah's hold-off was dramatic, aiming at what looked like empty air above and beside the target. Pop. The pause stretched endlessly. At that distance, the bullet took nearly 2 seconds to arrive. 2 seconds where physics and probability argued against success. Hit. Center X. A collective gasp ran through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That's impossible." But the electronic scoring system didn't lie. The impossible had just happened. The sixth target appeared at 300 yards, but positioned behind a barrier that left only a small portion visible. Sarah shifted position slightly, finding an angle others hadn't considered. Her rifle spoke once more. Hit. X-ring. 7 down. 3 to go. Derek's face had progressed from pale to ashen. He recognized something in her shooting that transcended mere skill. This was artistry. The kind of performance that came from absolute fusion of shooter and weapon. The 8th target illuminated at maximum distance, 500 yards. in the rain and wind, with a .22 rifle. It was beyond impossible. It was absurd. The bullet would need to arc like a mortar round, fighting wind and rain the entire flight. Sarah stood motionless for 10 full seconds, reading conditions invisible to others. Her stance shifted minutely, accommodating for angles and forces that existed more in her mind than in measurable reality. When she finally pressed the trigger, it was with the certainty of someone who had already seen the bullet's path. The weight was agonizing. The small projectile flew through rain and wind, guided by a marksmanship that bordered on precognition. Hit. 9-ring. Her first shot outside the X-ring, but still a hit that defied physics. The crowd erupted in amazement. Even a 9 at that distance was miraculous. The 9th target appeared at 250 yards, almost mundane after what had come before. Sarah took it with the same care as all the others. Pop. Hit. Center X. 1 target remaining. The crowd pressed forward, Derek among them, his face a mask of recognition and dawning horror. He knew who she was now, understood why she was here, what this meant for him. The final target illuminated at 400 yards. Positioned at an extreme angle that required shooting through a narrow gap in the barriers. It was a shot designed to be nearly impossible. The course designer's final insult to competitors' skills. Sarah smiled slightly. The first emotion she'd shown, this shot. This was for David. She adjusted her stance one final time. The rifle becoming an extension of her will, the rain had intensified. Drops running down her face like tears she'd refused to shed for 5 years. Through the narrow gap, the target seemed to shimmer and dance. Distorted by rain and distance, Sarah's breathing slowed until it nearly stopped. In that moment of perfect stillness, she heard David's voice in her memory. Send it true. Baby, send it true. The rifle whispered its final word. Pop. Time stopped. The bullet flew through rain and wind, threading the narrow gap with surgical precision. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the electronic system to register the impact. Hit. Center X. Time, 3 minutes. 17 seconds. Perfect score. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then the crowd exploded. Even Derek's supporters couldn't contain their amazement. The Marine veteran started a slow clap that built into thunderous applause. Phones captured the moment as Sarah safed her rifle and stepped back from the line. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice cracked with emotion. We have just witnessed history. Sarah Mitchell has achieved the first perfect score in championship history, shooting a .22 rifle in impossible conditions. Sarah walked toward the preparation area, the crowd parting before her like a biblical sea. Derek stood in her path, his face a complex mixture of fear, anger, and recognition. We need to talk, he said quietly. Yes? Sarah agreed. We do. They moved to a quiet corner of the range, away from the celebrating crowd. Derek's hands shook as he faced her. You're Sarah Chen, he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah Mitchell. She corrected. I took my husband's name. I've kept it to honor his memory. Derek swallowed hard. What do you want? Sarah reached into her range bag and withdrew a manila envelope, weathered and worn from years of handling. The truth, she said simply. That's all I've ever wanted. She handed him the envelope. Inside, Derek found copies of his own quality control reports, the ones documenting the defective plate carriers, email chains where he'd overruled safety concerns, shipping manifests showing the defective units mixed with good ones, and finally, a photograph of David Mitchell in his gear, the failed plate carrier visible in haunting detail. You knew, Sarah said quietly. You knew the stitching would fail under stress. You knew soldiers would die. And you shipped them anyway. Derek's legs seemed to give out. He sank onto a nearby bench, the papers spilling from nerveless fingers, the contract penalties. We would have gone bankrupt. So instead, my husband bled out in a dusty street in Kandahar. Sarah's voice remained steady, but tears finally came. 5 years of grief and rage distilled into quiet words. He died believing his country had equipped him properly. He died trusting that people like you gave a damn about his life. I'm sorry, Derek whispered. The words were pathetically inadequate. Sorry doesn't bring him back, Sarah said, but maybe it can save others. She gestured to the documents. Those are copies. The originals are with the Department of Defense Criminal Investigation Service. They'll be opening a case Monday morning. Derek looked up sharply. You could have done this years ago. Why wait? Why this? He gestured weakly toward the range. Sarah picked up her rifle case. David's rifle. The one he'd taught her to shoot with during their courtship at Camp Pendleton. Because I needed you to know it was me. I needed you to understand that David's widow, the woman you dismissed and mocked, was the one who brought you down. Not with lawyers or politicians, but with the skills he taught me and the determination he loved. She turned to leave, then paused. Your wife doesn't know, does she? About the blood money that paid for your house, your cars, your reputation? Derek's silence was answer enough. Sarah nodded once and walked away, leaving him alone with the weight of his crimes. The awards ceremony proceeded without Derek, who had disappeared from the range. Sarah accepted the trophy with quiet dignity, deflecting questions about her background with practiced ease. The prize money, $10,000, she immediately donated to a veterans organization that helped military families affected by equipment failures. As the crowd finally dispersed, the Marine veteran approached her one last time. I knew David, he said softly. Served with him in Iraq before Afghanistan. Good Marine. Better man. Yes, Sarah whispered. He was. That shooting today? That was for him. Every shot, every breath, everything I've done for the last 5 years has been for him. The old Marine studied her weathered face. Seeing the toll that grief and purpose had taken, he'd be proud, not just of the shooting, but of how you handled it, with honor. Monday morning came with explosive news. Federal agents raided Hawthorne Tactical Solutions, sizing computers, documents, and financial records. Derek Hawthorne was arrested at his home, charged with fraud, criminal negligence, and 12 counts of depraved indifference homicide, one for each soldier who had died wearing his defective equipment. The story dominated military and shooting sports media. Sarah's perfect score became legendary. But the real story, the widow who'd spent 5 years preparing for justice, resonated even deeper. Other families came forward, sharing their losses, their suspicions about equipment failures that had been dismissed as combat casualties. Sarah testified only once. At a congressional hearing on military procurement oversight, she wore David's dress blues, the ones she'd kept pressed and perfect in their closet. Her testimony was brief, factual, and devastating. She spoke not of her own loss, but of the betrayal of trust that occurred when contractors prioritized profits over soldiers' lives. Within 6 months, new regulations were in place. The Mitchell Standards. They were informally called, requiring enhanced testing and accountability for all military safety equipment. Derek Hawthorne was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His company liquidated, assets distributed to victims' families. Sarah returned to her quiet life, but not to hiding. She opened a small marksmanship school, teaching fundamentals to new shooters, especially women and veterans dealing with trauma. The battered Ruger 10/22 hung on the wall of her office, retired from competition, but never from memory. On the first anniversary of the competition, she found herself back at David's grave. The cemetery was peaceful in the spring sunshine, rows of white stones marking Hero's Rest. She knelt beside his marker, placing a small brass casing on the marble, from the shot that had started Derek's downfall. Mission complete, she whispered, echoing words from another visit. But this time, she added, I can rest now. Baby, I can finally rest. As she stood to leave, Sarah noticed a young woman approaching, wearing army fatigues, carrying a folded flag, another widow. From the look in her eyes, Sarah waited as the woman passed, then heard her name called. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Jennifer Rodriguez. My husband, he was wearing one of those defective vests. I wanted to thank you for fighting when the rest of us didn't know how. Sarah embraced the younger woman, feeling the cycle of grief and justice continuing. We fight for them, she said simply, because they can't fight for themselves anymore. As she drove away, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Peace. Not happiness, that might never fully return, but the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled, justice served, and love honored. The simple woman who'd been scoffed at had changed everything with a .22 rifle and an unbreakable will. Sometimes, the smallest caliber carries the heaviest truth.